Discipline machinery. I got into trouble at school for hitting a boy today. I got sent to the office but nothing happened to him. It's just so freaking unfair. Down the hall I go to the principal's office. The principal talks for a while and has a really sad but stern look about her. Finally she says, "It's time, Kelly." Time? Time for what? "The little room, Kelly," says Ms. Elskins, the school principal. I've heard of the spanking machine before but never actually seen it. The few kids I talk to have told me it's the most awful punishment you can get. But I've heard so many different things about it I didn't know what to believe. In fact, I really didn't think it was true, to be honest. But from what I also heard, it's supposed to be high-tech and punish a child the most safe and correct way there is, yet render a painful experience which boast that the child will learn to see the error of their ways. "The sooner you go in that room the sooner you'll come out," says Ms. Elskins. "So let's get it over with and maybe next time you'll think twice about hitting people, cutting class, or being disrespectful." "AW blow on it," I say under my breath. "Into the room right now, young lady." Okay, I say as I walk into the room. Oh my God. You gotta be shiting me. This has got to be the weirdest and most crazy-looking contraption I have ever seen in my life. Well, part of it looks like a control box of some sort. It looks to have a small computer screen. Then some big mechanical arms coming from a big round drum type thing. At the bottom appears to be a platform with a sand pit. Then there's a round wool-like thing with 4 belts hanging from it. That must be the part that spanks you. I step a little closer. Suddenly lights on the control panel light up and some motors turn on. The spanking machine comes to life. I stand there and stare. "Step forward, please." A mechanical robotic voice says. I comply. "Remove your shoes and socks." What? That's crazy. I pull off my sneakers and my pink socks. "Step into the sandpit." I step onto the platform and place my feet in the sandpit as told. Kelly James, correct? Yes, I say. At this point I'm becoming really weary. More than weary, I'm getting scared. I lower my pants. Oh, how awful embarrassing. Can this thing see my privates? I take down my panties. "Please bend over and grab the rubber handles." I bend over and grab 2 rubber handles. There is a mold platform that supports my arms and it's really not too uncomfortable. All of a sudden something under the sand grabs my ankles and locks my feet in place. Now I'm more than scared. I'm terrified. I look up and see the computer monitor and it shows info about me. My name, age, weight, and something that says spanking preference number 2 set by parent. What? Suddenly I see mechanical arms begin to move around. Some going behind me. Next. I feel a play of air against my butt cheeks. It must be that wool thing with the belts on it. Yes, that's it. It's coming to get me. I lower my head and begin to cry. Finally the spanking begins. Snap, 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 snap. I begin to cry out loud. I cry and cry just like over mommy's lap. Only this is worse, cause I always know about when mommy will stop. This weird thing I don't know. Snap, 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 snap. Stops. I feel the grip in my ankles loosen and all the sand drains away. Next I see the mechanical arms move back to their starting position. "Please pull your pants and undergarments back on." I quickly do so. "Step off the platform and put your shoes back on." I put my shoes back on as fast as I can. I go running out the door. I hear the spanking machine say, "Thank you, have a nice day." Yeah, right. I run home as fast as I can. Summer with Aunt Laurie. I will never forget the summer of 2001. My mom had went out of town on vacation and left me with my Aunt Laurie. I have always wet the bed and she knew this. The first night I was there my aunt had me put on a good nights after my bath, about 2 hours before bedtime. Needless to say, I was wet by bedtime. Aunt Laurie got me a fresh goodnights and had me change. The next morning I woke up to a wet goodnights and wet sheets also. I went and told my aunt and she changed the sheets and then gave me another bath. We then went to the store. She left me in the toy aisle while she went shopping. Only later did I find out what she got for me. After my bath later that night she told me that she had something different for me to wear to bed. She laid me down and put me in a size 6 Pampers and put my jammies on over it. When I woke up I was wet and squishy. I had pooped myself while sleeping. While I was getting ready for my morning bath my aunt asked me if I was dry. I told her no and she told me to lay down. She untapped my diaper and cleaned me up. After my bath she told me to lay down. By this time I knew I liked wearing diapers. Aunt Laurie put me in a new diaper and told me if I could stay clean for the day I wouldn't have to wear one the next day. Within the first hour I had pooped again. She knew it right away and changed me. Then she said I would wear diapers the rest of the summer 24/7. Little did she know that was fine by me. She diapered and changed me for the rest of the summer true to her word. Only she also dressed me and treated me like a baby as well. Anything I drank I had to drink out of a baby bottle and when I ate she had to feed me. I was in heaven. Everywhere we went that summer I wore my diaper. During the day she would have me wear overall shorts or a onesie. When I was a little older I found out that my Aunt Laurie also wore diapers. She didn't poop in them like I did, at least not usually. This is how I found out she wore too. We were sitting on the couch. It was rather hot so I was only wearing my diaper. My Aunt Laurie was wearing a blue tank top and shorter red skirt. I started to smell poop, but knew it wasn't me. She started squirming on the couch and her skirt came up enough that I could see her diaper. I asked her why she was wearing one and she told me she liked how it felt. I asked her if she used her diaper and she said yes. The first diaper I ever changed was my Aunt Laurie's. Every summer after that my aunt and I wore diapers 24/7. This is my true story of how I became a diaper love. A diapered aftermath. Howerton cleared the obstacle and sprinted for cover as explosions rocked the earth around him. He was unsure of where exactly the enemy was but was only focused on reaching his patient. There was a pause in the mortar fire which he exploited as he took off like a rocket towards where he had heard the cry for a medic. Diving into the shallow trench the soldiers were using for cover his eyes took in the situation. One of the men had taken a hit in his traps only missing his Kevlar by a few centimeters. He was struggling to breathe and his teeth were red with blood. Howerton took charge of the man trying to determine the extent of his injury as the other men in the ditch returned fire. A nearby M240B ripped open a long burst spraying ammo in a Z pattern over the enemy position. They always said you never heard the mortar round that killed you and Howerton certainly didn't. He hadn't realized he was airborne until he saw the ground rushing towards him. He felt no pain, which seemed odd to him. He tried to stand but his legs did not respond. Puzzled by this he looked down to see his legs had been removed by the blast. Joseph's eyes snapped open. He let out a long sigh, and covered his face with his hands. Looking at the clock he saw it was only 5 in the morning, he didn't need to get up for another hour or so. Julie was sound asleep next to him, a welcome change. He thought about the dream, what it felt like to run again. It was the closest he'd ever get to having his mobility back. He had to remind himself he wasn't a PJ anymore, though not a day went by that he didn't think about it. The sheer rush of it all and the pride in wearing the maroon beret were precious to him. He looked at Julie again, he hadn't given it up in vain. He smiled at seeing her rest so peacefully, it wasn't often that she slept through the night with no disturbances. Putting his mind at ease he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. The alarm would go off what seemed only a few moments later. Joseph was quick to silence it, not wanting to wake his wife. Swinging his leg over the side of the bed he reached down and firmly took hold of his prosthetic leg, lifting it up into position. His right leg was amputated at the knee, a reminder he joked of how he met Julie. It only took a few moments for him to attach the pseudolimb and carefully climb out of bed, taking precaution against making the smallest sound and gently shutting the door behind him. Heading down the hall of their one-story home, for obvious reasons, he proceeded into the kitchen to start a pot of coffee. With that done, he sat down in the living room and turned on the TV, lowering the volume and quickly switching to a news channel. Images of the war flashed on the screen as a group of well-educated individuals discussed the ethics of the situation. Joseph simply shook his head as they bantered back and forth. It didn't matter what he thought, though, he was wrong. Well-educated college graduates always had the most complete view of war, and they were perfectly willing to share it with you, whether it be through a well-written speech or a PowerPoint if they were really creative. He was more interested in what was going on, not their opinion of what should be done. He could decide that himself. He continued to watch the program, picking up details of the war effort. Things were proceeding ahead of the timetable set, and it was possible troop levels could begin dropping as soon as next year. He was glad to hear it. They had been fighting a long time. That reminded him, Mike and Tom were on leave, something PJs rarely received, and they had made arrangement to meet up for lunch and catch up on old times. He hadn't seen them since he'd returned home, over a year. It seemed like such a long time ago, he thought. He heard the door creak and footsteps come down the hall. Julie came around the corner, her hair strayed in front of her face but did nothing to hide her friendly smile or brilliant eyes. He smiled at her, being easily able to tell she hadn't had another nightmare. "Morning, beautiful, coffee should be ready soon," she smiled back. "Good morning, thanks for making it," he nodded. They were both practically addicted to the stuff. As he thought this, the buzzer on the pot announced the brewing process was finished. He began to rise to remove the pot when Julie motioned for him to stay. "Don't get up, I'll grab it," he thanked her and settled back down. As she walked past him, he heard a barely audible crinkle. Since she was likely dry, she must have forgotten she had it on. Julie pushed the off button on the brewer and quickly sorted through the cabinet before finding 2 mugs. She set them down and filled both up just below the brim. Steam rolled off the top of the dark liquid as she picked both up and moved back into the living room, handing one to Joseph before sitting down to watch the news. She was just as interested in any updates as he was. However, she only caught the tail end of it, meaning she'd have to settle for Joseph's summarization while they got some breakfast together. Despite what Joseph thought, she was aware of her current attire, but without caffeine was too apathetic to bother with it until later. With the current program coming to an end, she stood back up and went into the kitchen to begin making breakfast, with Joseph joining her a few moments later. While doing so, she noticed a slight discomfort pressing on her bladder. Deciding she would have to throw the diaper away wet or dry, she decided to indulge in the convenience and continued to crack eggs as the warmth spread across the diaper. Any moisture was wicked away, leaving no sensation of wetness. A little more preparation and breakfast was ready, which they quickly sat down to enjoy, making small talk over the sound produced by the TV. After finishing the meal, Julie went to get ready and hop in the shower, while Joseph made an attempt at cleaning the kitchen. He would finish first and quickly went back to change into more suitable clothing as Julie finished getting dressed. She checked the clock in their bedroom as she exited the bathroom. She was running a little behind. She gave Joseph a goodbye kiss and quickly made her way out to her car and headed to the office she worked at. Joseph worked as a drafter for an engineering firm and was often able to do the majority of his work at home, allowing him to avoid driving, which he found much more difficult with a prosthetic. Satisfied with his clothing, he headed into his makeshift office, consisting of the most part of a desk with a drafting elbow and a variety of instruments on top, ranging from a compass to an electric eraser. He would use a CAD program for the final draft, but found he could generally get a rough sketch done on paper much quicker than in the computer. Sitting down in his chair, he quickly resumed his work from the previous day and was quickly lost in the drawing. Chapter 2. The next time he bothered to look at the clock, it was steadily approaching his meeting time with his old war buddies. Setting his tools aside, he covered the drafting paper with a protective sheet before going and gathering his wallet, keys, as well as a Ruger LCP fitted with crimson trace grips. They didn't live in an area with a high crime rate, but he would rather have it and never use it than not have it and need it. With everything he needed, he locked the door behind him and climbed into his car. The engine took a little coaxing, but it finally caught and started up. He backed out of the driveway and headed for the restaurant they had agreed to meet at. A few minutes' drive later, he pulled into a local sports bar, driving past the handicapped spots and pulling into an empty parking space. He entered to the noise of several big screen TVs displaying a variety of sports, even one with soccer, which he found odd. In the back, he spotted two figures in Arbus and quickly moved in their direction. Tom caught sight of him and quickly got up to meet him, a grin on his face, with Mike quickly following. Greetings, handshakes, and slaps on the back were exchanged as the three men retired to their booth, laughing like the old friends they were. Joseph was amazed at how little the two of them had changed, although Mike now sported a scar above his right eye. Seeing them again made it almost feel like old times, when they had worked together so closely. He almost forgot about his leg, the memories were so vivid. The three ordered food, and at Mike's prodding the other two agreed to a game of cutthroat. Leaving their booth, they made way to a pool table. It was well worn but still level and without any cuts in the felt. Each man took a pool cue from a shelf as Tom racked the balls. Joseph broke, sending a 3 into a pocket and electing to take numbers 6 through 10. He would miss his next shot, switching off to Mike, who knocked in a 7 and taking numbers 11 through 15, leaving Tom with 1 through 5. As Mike lined up his shot, Tom addressed Joseph. "So, how's the wife?" "Good," he responded. "Things have been going a lot better recently." "Glad to hear it," was the response. Joseph sighed. "Still, it's not fair though, she doesn't deserve it." "No one does," Tom replied. "That's war though, nothing's fair." "You certainly didn't get a fair deal." "Yeah, but it's different. I have a replacement for what I lost. It's not like she can just go get this fixed," Joseph replied. Tom simply nodded in agreement. Joseph changed the subject. "What about you, Mike?" "Everything well." Mike took a break from his shot, sighed and then shook his head. "No, things are bad. These deployments are killing Sarah." "I'm worried." Both of the others were silent for a moment, a knowing look in their eyes. Mike was the oldest of the group and had been a PJ longer than either of them. Sarah wasn't his first wife. He had been married once before, but his constant deployments had ended the relationship. He was always concerned history would repeat itself. Tom consoled him. "Don't worry about it, man. Deployments are always hard on the family. I think she still cares about you. Just make sure she knows you aren't abandoning her," Mike responded. "Suppose you're right. I want to make this work, but I can't give up being a PJ. I just wish I could explain to her how important this is. It's not about the adrenaline rush or the glory in the end. It's about making sure everyone goes home," he sighed. "It's just hard." "Nobody said it wouldn't be," Joseph replied. Mike chuckled. "No, you're right. I've been a PJ long enough to know that firsthand." The three shared a laugh, diffusing the situation. Their food arrived shortly after and they quickly made their way back to the booth. As they sat down to eat, Mike grabbed their attention. "Hey," Tom and Joseph looked at him as he raised his glass in an informal toast. "That others may live." The other two smiled and clinked their glasses with his. "Hooyah," they said in unison. Joseph took a break from his drawing to rest his eyes. On the paper there was an intricate web of lines that seemed to hold no meaning. However Joseph's practiced, I could see the final image slowly coming together. He heard the front door creak open. Julie was home from work. He got out of his chair and went to meet her. She had a frustrated look on her face. "How was your day?" he asked. She didn't respond at first, giving a small sigh. "Oh, it was just one of those days," she continued. "I'm glad to be home though. Have any ideas for dinner?" "Actually," Joseph replied, "since you've had a rough day, what do you say we eat out?" "I'll buy," she smiled in response. "That sounds pretty good to me as long as you're buying. I'm going to go change clothes first though, and then we can decide on a place," Joseph chuckled. By we, do you mean you? She didn't answer him and instead walked off to the bedroom, shutting the door behind her. He shook his head. Guess that was a yes, he said, going back to clean off his desk. As he finished, Julie called from the bedroom. I forgot to ask how was lunch, he replied from his office. Great, it's always good to see the guys again. I can't believe it's been almost a year since I last saw them. How long are they on leave? Couple months, I imagine they'll spend most of it with their families. He intentionally left out the part about Mike's troubles. I can't imagine what it would be like to only see you for 2 months at a time. I don't know how they do it. It's hard, he replied. Chapter 3. Dinner had been a short affair, though the food was excellent. After they had paid the bill, Julie suggested they go for a walk, as the weather was so nice. Joseph had agreed, and now they were walking down the sidewalk enjoying the clear night. The air had a bit of a bite to it from the cold, but both wore a light jacket to guard against it. There were no clouds to obstruct their view, and a few stars winked in the darkness despite the light pollution of nearby street lamps. With the exception of a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt walking the opposite direction at the end of the sidewalk, the street was deserted. There were hardly even any cars. With exception of their footsteps, hardly a sound broke the silence. It was peaceful and soothing. As they passed the other pedestrian, Joseph greeted him with a smile. Evening. Evening, the other man replied, drawing a revolver from his waistband. Houghton's demeanor changed instantly. Adrenaline rushed into his blood, causing momentary panic before settling into a cool-headed disposition. He moved in front of Hawkins. Wallet now, the gunman said quite plainly. Houghton practiced his draw in his mind as he reached for his wallet. He wasn't going to kill this kid over a couple bucks. He handed it to him slowly as to show no hostility and directed Hawkins to do the same with her handbag. With both the items, the gunman chuckled and with incredible speed and accuracy directed a blow to Houghton's right knee, causing his prosthetic to buckle under him and sending him to the concrete. Hawkins caught the gunman off guard and reacted violently, slamming her fist into his jaw, while simultaneously wrapping her hand around the revolver's barrel, directing it away from her body while trying to wrestle it out of his hand. The gunman fired, the bullet bouncing harmlessly off the concrete and shattering a window. However, the escaping hot gases that propelled the bullet passed through the cylinder gap, singeing Hakin's hand, causing her to let go instinctively. The gunman took hold of her by her shoulder and threw her to the ground with brute strength while bringing the revolver on her, baring blood-stained teeth. She stared down the barrel, her eyes wide with fear. A small red dot hovered on the gunman's chest and Houghton's LCP snapped twice, sending 2.380 ACP rounds into his chest. The gunman grasped at his wounds as if he couldn't understand he'd been shot, and then fell to his knees before finally sinking to the ground. Julie remained frozen where she was, as Joseph struggled to his feet. Julie, he asked, shaking her. She was unresponsive for a moment before shaking her head and looking at him, her eyes clouded. You okay? She shook her head no. Chapter 4. Joseph opened the door and helped Julie inside. Joseph had called an ambulance shortly after the incident and then was taken to a local police station where he was questioned as to what had happened. Julie had barely said a word in the hours following, and she had a far-off look in her eyes. Joseph hoped it would pass, but he couldn't get her to talk about it, which troubled him. I'm going to take a shower, she said in a quiet voice. Joseph nodded. She cautiously made her way back to their bedroom, shutting the door. Joseph sat down in the living room, his mind buzzing. The shower kicked on a moment later. Joseph was consumed in his thought. How could he have let this happen? Julie had almost been killed. His guilt tore him up inside. He had failed to act in time. He should have been more alert. Seeking a distraction, he hit the power button on the television. It did little to help him. He felt like a failure. He felt less than human. He felt unworthy to have once been a PJ. He buried his head in his hands and breathed steadily, trying to control his anger. He lost track of time sitting there but knew it had been a while. He was about to get up when he realized the shower was still running. Julie usually took short showers, a result of several years in the Air Force. This was unusual. He wanted to pass it off as nothing, not wanting to disturb her in case nothing was wrong, but he had to make sure. He went back into the bedroom and lightly rapped on the door. No response. Julie, he called, knocking a bit more firmly. Something was wrong. He opened the door into the steam-filled room, glancing at the fogged mirror. The shower curtain was drawn tight. Julie? You okay? Still no response. Hesitantly he drew the curtain back and his heart sank lower than he knew was possible. His wife was sitting in the tub as the now cool water sprayed over her. She struggled to catch breaths between quiet sobs. He reached over and shut off the water. She did not look at him. Grabbing a towel, he covered her with it and got her on her feet and out of the tub. She leaned on him heavily as he guided her into the bedroom. She was almost completely unresponsive. He helped her sit down on the bed. Julie, he asked, begging for a response. She finally answered in an almost inaudible voice. Could you grab my clothes? He quickly did as she asked, going into the bathroom to pick up the stack of clothes she had grabbed beforehand. On the top of the pile was a folded diaper. He came back and handed her the clothes, leaving to give her privacy. She shed the towel and quickly dressed herself, calling to Joseph to let him know she was finished. Her diaper crinkled as she lay down and pulled the bedspread over her. Joseph got down on his knees to wish her good night when she spoke again. Please, she asked, don't go until I'm asleep. Her eyes showed a hint of fear. Taking her hand, he stayed kneeling beside the bed, talking to her soothingly until her eyes finally fluttered and closed. She began to breathe deep and steadily, signifying she was asleep. Joseph reluctantly untangled his hand, which she withdrew. He crept out of the bedroom and gently eased the door shut. He could hardly live with himself. Not wanting to disturb her, he grabbed an extra blanket and made do with the couch. As he lay on the couch, his mind boiled with activity. His guilt assailed him without mercy as he tried to force himself to sleep. Lord, he prayed, please forgive me, because I can't. He wished he could take Julie's pain onto his own back and carry it for her. He had protected her from bullets, grenades, and rockets, but he couldn't fight the enemy she now faced. It tore him up to know that. Joseph eased the car around the turn and accelerated over the flat ground. Julie was in the car with him, smiling that great smile. He couldn't quite remember where they were going or where they had come from, but was content with the ride for now. Suddenly the terrain changed. On either side of the road the ditches deepened to form massive canyons. He paid them no mind though. Then he felt the car lurch as a tire blew out. He had forgotten to check them. He fought for control as the car slid off into the ravine. In the seat next to him, Julie screamed as his vision blurred into blackness. His consciousness slowly came to him. Julie was still screaming. He was on the couch in their living room. He wasn't sure what time it was though. Julie was still screaming. His mind finally snapped into focus. He quickly got his prosthetic attached and ran for the bedroom, almost breaking down the door. Julie was sitting up in their bed, weeping uncontrollably. He rushed over to her and she reached out to him, clinging to him like a frightened child. He sat on the bed and held her in his lap, her sobs continuing. He gently began to rock her back and forth in a soothing pattern as he reassured her in a calm voice. She slowly began to calm down, but she would not let go of him. He continued to rock her, neither said a word. He could feel through her clothing that her diaper was completely saturated. She probably needed a new one. She was silent now as he continued to rock her. He saw her tear-stained face and bloodshot red eyes and felt a knife slide into his gut. She watched him the entire time, her gaze never shifted for a moment. A few minutes later, exhausted by her emotional collapse, she slipped back into sleep, still in his arms. He stood up, still holding her, and gently laid her on the bed. He thought about her diaper. He didn't want to leave her in that condition, but at the same time didn't feel quite right about it. He deliberated for a moment before deciding that if it were the other way around, she would most likely do it for him even if she was uncomfortable. He rummaged through a drawer and grabbed a fresh diaper. As quickly as he could, he removed the wet one and replaced it with the dry, making sure tapes were tight. After disposing of the wet one, he came back, kissed her on the forehead, and sank into a corner. He wasn't going to leave. He prayed in silence as he slowly slipped into sleep. He didn't wake up until a few hours later, and when he did, the first thing he saw was Julie scrambling for the bathroom. He forced himself awake and went in after her through the open door. She leaned over the toilet and began to vomit. He quickly came behind her and pulled her hair back out of her face and began to rub her back. She threw up several more times, each time draining more of her strength. When she was finished, he helped her lean back against the wall as she caught quick breaths. He held a hand against her forehead. She was burning up with fever despite the fact that she was shaking like a leaf. He quickly grabbed a blanket off the bed and wrapped her trembling body in it. He then grabbed a glass and gave her some water to rinse her mouth out, which she graciously accepted. "How you doing?" he asked, sitting next to her. "I guess I feel a little better," she said weakly through chattering teeth. "I'm freezing though." "Let's get you back to bed, huh?" Joseph replied. She nodded and he helped her up, supporting the majority of her weight. He got her back into bed and piled all matter of insulation on top until she felt warm enough. As he retreated back to his corner, Julie called to him. "Joseph, thanks for taking care of me. I hate waking up wet," she trailed off. "It's not a problem," he replied. "Try and get some rest, okay? I'll be here if you need me." "Thank you," she replied. "Love you." Joseph smiled for the first time since before the event. "I love you too." Chapter 5. Joseph woke up to the silence of the morning as rays of light peeked through the curtains into the dark room. Julie was still sound asleep. He crept over and laid a hand on her forehead. She still had a fever. She stirred. He silently condemned himself for waking her. She slowly rolled over and cracked her eyes open. Her voice was a little hoarse. "Morning," she said weakly. "Hey," he replied. "Feel any better?" She shook her head. "No, I feel so weak I'm not even sure if I trust myself to walk." "Stomach?" he asked. She was so tired she couldn't keep her eyes open while answering. "A little better. Could you get me something to drink?" "I'm really thirsty," he nodded. "I'll be right back." He left the bedroom and went into the kitchen to find a suitable container. He was glad she hadn't had another nightmare. Her being ill was nothing great either, but he could at least handle this. He had treated dying men on more than one occasion. A fever was nothing. Going into the back of a cabinet, he pulled out a Camelback, choosing it because of its large capacity and 0% chance of spilling water. He quickly rinsed it out and filled it back up with cool water before sealing it up and taking it back to Julie. She hadn't moved an inch. He guided the tube of the Camelback into her hand. "Remember, take sips," she didn't acknowledge. She placed the end of the tube in her mouth and bit down on the soft end, sucking water through the tube. When her thirst was quenched, she placed the tube on the nightstand by their bed and thanked Joseph. She was promptly out cold the next second. Joseph crept out of the room to let her sleep in peace. She slept for several more hours until she was woken by nature's calling. She tried getting out of bed, but her muscles were limp and unable to support her weight. Frustrated, she relaxed and slipped back into sleep, her diaper now heavier and warmer than when she had woken up. An hour later, Joseph came back in to check on her. Seeing she was asleep, he was about to leave when she called to him. "Joseph, could you do me a favor?" He re-entered the room. "Sure, what do you need?" She hesitated for a moment. "Could you bring me a diaper?" He made no comment and quickly went to grab one. "You need help?" he asked. She nodded. "Yeah, sorry," he shook his head. "Don't worry about it, for better or for worse, right?" She smiled. "Something like that, thank you." "No problem." He quickly helped her out of her wet diaper before taping on the dry in its place. The rest of the day went by in much of a similar way, with Joseph attending to Julie in her sickness. His guilt was momentarily laid aside as he concentrated on making sure she was comfortable, hydrated, and dry. The next day, Joseph was in the living room taking a break from his drawing to rest his eyes. Julie had recovered enough to walk now, but for the most part still remained in bed, still having almost no energy. Her nightmares had decreased in intensity since the first night, but she remained in diapers as she had occasional accidents when asleep. He sat down on the couch and looked down at his prosthetic. He had never quite gotten used to having the dead weight attached to his knee. It was a constant reminder of his limitations. He wasn't the same person anymore. It seemed like he felt incomplete. He was lost in thought and hadn't heard Julie walk down the hall. She moved onto the couch and leaned up against him, her damp diaper crinkled. He wrapped an arm around her. No, he wasn't incomplete. He had been given something better than what he had lost. Epilogue. Several months later. The nurse escorted Joseph into the small room. The white linoleum tile smelled of cleaning products and reflected a warped image of the above world. He smiled seeing Julie lying in the bed, and she smiled back, a bundle in her arms. The nurse saw herself out as Joseph approached his wife. Her eyes glimmered in the fluorescent light. Joseph kneeled down by the bed and looked at the face of his sleeping son for the first time. He stayed by the side of the bed until Julie began to doze off. He took his son from her arms and laid him in a crib inside the room. He did not stir. When he turned around, Julie had slipped into sleep. Nightmares no longer waited for her. He crept over and kissed her forehead. She smiled. Joseph retired to a chair and soon was overcome by sleep himself.